Plane stories. When was the last time you went on a plane? Did you have a good journey? Or did you have a bad one? Here's a collection of stories about people's experiences on aeroplanes. This is the first part of a mini-series. That sinking feeling. John Wilkins found out that internal flights in some East European countries can be more expensive than intercontinental ones.
I once had to take an internal flight in a country in East Europe. I won't name names, partly because I have to return there every now and then, and partly because I don't think they deserve a really bad name. Anyway, I checked in all right, and I went to the departure gate. But before boarding, there was another checkpoint. The captain of the plane was there, and he was talking to the passengers. At first I thought he was just greeting the passengers. Then it was my turn, and I realized how wrong I had been. "You need to pay a 40% surcharge," the captain told me in a thick East European accent. "What?" I exclaimed. "But I've already paid for my ticket." "Yes, you have paid for the ticket, but this does not give you the right to a seat. You pay the 40% surcharge or you stand." I was so furious that I just said, "Okay, I stand." And with that, I boarded the plane and I stood the whole way. Luckily, it wasn't a long flight. White knuckle ride. Sandra had a really scary flight from St. Louis to Indianapolis last August.
The night I took the flight to Indianapolis was just 3 days after a major plane crash. As a result, everyone was a bit nervous. Just to make matters worse, there was a big storm, with rain pouring down and lightning flashing in the sky. When it was time to board, they hustled us onto the plane, closed the doors, and then told us that they had just been informed that we couldn't take off because of the weather. We sat there for 45 long minutes until the clearance was given for takeoff. No sooner were we in the air than the passenger area filled with smoke. Everyone started coughing and choking. Luckily, the oxygen masks dropped and we were able to breathe normally. Seconds later, the planes made a number of sickening turns and steadily lost altitude. Next thing, I remember looking out of the window and seeing all these fire engines on the runway. When we landed, we had to slide down the emergency chute. The thing that made everyone really angry was that at no point did the crew say anything to us, and our attempts to speak to the captain were all in vain, as he was nowhere to be seen. Not enough bags. Emil Saunders had one of the most disgusting flights of his life on his way to Melbourne.
A few months ago, I was on a business trip to Melbourne. The flight was quite full, and including a party of unaccompanied minors. The flight attendants had gathered all the children together and sat them on 3 rows next to each other, just across from where I was sitting. I guess the flight attendants thought this would make their job easier, as they could keep an eye on the 8 children without much trouble. But they were wrong. Shortly after takeoff, one of the youngsters rang the buzzer. "I feel sick," the little girl told the flight attendant. The attendant quickly handed the child an airsick bag, then went to get some water. But just as she got back, the girl threw up, and that seemed to have a domino effect, and all the kids started vomiting, one after the other. All the attendants were running around the plane trying to get as many sick bags as they could. Eventually they ran out. I must say it was quite funny, although it did put me off my lunch. How nice. Greg remembers a very pleasant experience on a Southeast Asian flight to Nepal.
I was on a flight from Hong Kong to Kathmandu which was delayed. The official excuse was the weather, but I saw a group of technicians inspecting the plane on the runway. Eventually, we began to board the plane at 11:30 p.m, more than 10 hours later than scheduled. While the plane taxied across the runway, our flight attendants began to give emergency instructions. "In the case of an emergency," one of them said, "lights in the aisle will guide you to the exits." And just at that moment, the main lights went out, and the emergency lights came on. In a panic, the flight attendants scrambled for places to sit. They all found a seat except one, who was trapped in the middle of the plane. So, do you know what she did? Well, she just reached down to the nearest man, me, unbuckled my seatbelt and sat on my lap, belting herself in as the plane lifted off the ground. I must say, that was one of the most pleasant takeoffs I've ever had.